December 2, 1941, at the Kure Naval Base, Japan. A profound silence hung over the massive shipyard, where battleships were being prepared for an inevitable war. Lieutenant Koji, a young engineer in the Naval Construction Department, stood beneath the dim lights, admiring the sleek, powerful look of the Type 93 torpedo, known to the West as the Long Lance. It was the absolute pride of the IJN: impossible range, destructive speed. However, Koji's task focused on the air-launched version, the Type 91. His colleagues, with disdainful expressions, criticized the design for requiring flimsy wooden fins to stabilize it during the high-altitude drop, calling it a shameful compromise compared to the pure steel Type 93. They called it a toy torpedo, a mockery. But Koji knew that this seemingly absurd refinement was vital for a distant war, where the speed of an airstrike was everything. He saw the absolute confidence of the pilots who smirked nearby. They believed their adversary was trapped in the illusion of technological backwardness. The enormous pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy was being entrusted to a weapon they themselves doubted. Early morning, December 7, 1941, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. The roar of Aichi D-3A Val aircraft engines tore through the peaceful sky. U.S. pilots barely had time to understand what was happening, and their battleships lay exposed in the shallow waters of the harbor. The Japanese task force, Kido Butai, had executed a perfect attack. In subsequent USN reports, they could not believe Japanese torpedoes could operate effectively in such shallow water. Since World War I, torpedoes typically required significant depth to arm. The Type 91 torpedoes, with special stabilizers added after Japanese engineers painstakingly researched how they would glide across the water's surface, demonstrated their merciless superiority. On a damaged U.S. aircraft carrier, a torpedo officer picked up a fragment of a Type 91 wooden fin and sneered, "This wooden toy? What do they think this is?" It was the sound of technological arrogance and misunderstanding, a bitter echo that would later resonate. They had underestimated their opponent based on appearance, ignoring the fact that a simplified weapon is sometimes the most dangerous. Early 1942, at a U.S. Naval Intelligence Analysis Facility in Hawaii, Lieutenant Commander Ed Baker reviewed reports gathered after the campaigns in the Philippines and the East Indies. Blurry photographs showed Japanese torpedoes with a crude appearance, featuring what looked like wooden plates. Baker shook his head, dismissing the concerns of some younger officers. "We have the Mark 13 torpedo. It's slow, but it's reliable. The Japanese weapon is a crude amalgamation, a disjointed patchwork. Their range will be incomparable." Blind faith in superior American technology created a screen of illusion. The final report on Japanese torpedo capability was systematically downplayed. Low speed, limited operating depth, and difficulty in air launching. No one suspected that the Type 91, designed to separate from the aircraft and stabilize instantly, was the key to the aircraft carrier warfare the U.S. Navy was still struggling to master. Preparation for the next battle was built on a fatal mistake, believing that the little wooden toy would simply fall apart. May 1942, aboard the USS Enterprise, one of the USN's remaining capital ships. Captain George Murray spoke to the SBD Dauntless dive bomber pilots. The atmosphere was one of weariness, but also deep confidence.
They had just survived the Battle of the Coral Sea, and their adversary's spirit was underestimated. Murray emphasized, "You will have to bomb from high altitude. Our torpedoes are still flawed, but our high-explosive bombs are not." As for the Japanese, they are using a weapon that only works in port. We will overwhelm them with steel, not with wood. It was a false comfort. In the ready room, a young pilot read an old magazine describing the complexity of American torpedoes and comparing it to the field technology of the Japanese. He laughed and threw the magazine down. In the vast ocean, the belief in their technical superiority created a fragile psychological shell, preventing them from preparing for the coming storm. Morning, June 4th, 1942, over Midway Island. This was a day of chaos and destiny. The American TBD Devastator Torpedo Bomber Squadron plunged in, making suicidal runs against the 4 aircraft carriers of the Kido Butai. They flew low, heedless of the intense anti-aircraft fire. But their torpedoes failed, either not detonating or running off course. Meanwhile, Japanese pilots, recognizing the threat, quickly armed their B-5N Kate aircraft with Type 91 torpedoes, ready for a counterstrike against the American carriers. On the Akagi, Vice Admiral Nagumo ordered preparations. The planes, loaded with Type 91 torpedoes, their wooden stabilizing fins gleaming in the sunlight, looked like deadly insects. They were no longer a joke. The urgency and deadly efficiency of the rearming process showed the IJN's perfect preparation for the open battle, far different from the USN's easy assessment. Midday, June 4, 1942. After 3 Japanese carriers were sunk within minutes due to American dive bomber attacks, the remaining aircraft carrier Hiru launched its final counterattack. 2 waves of planes, each carrying Type 91 torpedoes, headed toward the USS Yorktown. On the Yorktown's deck, American sailors watched as the Japanese planes skimmed the water, releasing small objects that quickly created long, straight wakes. They moved faster, deeper, and more accurately than any torpedo they had ever encountered. There was no more laughter, only terrifying silence. American pilots now understood that the combination of the refined Type 91 torpedo and precise Japanese air attack tactics created a nearly perfect killing machine. The Hiryu's torpedo attack delivered a fatal blow. Type 91 torpedoes pierced the steel hull, severely damaging the propulsion system and flooding multiple compartments. On the Yorktown, sailors struggled with fires and rising seawater. The emergency alarms screamed continuously. A technical officer inspecting a large tear in the ship's side saw a sliver of splintered wood jammed in the ripped steel. It was a remnant of the Type 91 torpedo's stabilizing fin. In that moment, the truth was clear. The wooden toy they had mocked was not only effective, but superior to any weapon they could counter. The officer's face showed not anger, but desperation. The USN's technological arrogance had cost lives and a major warship. Afternoon, June 4th, 1942. The battle had subsided, but the chaos continued. American destroyers scrambled to rescue the Yorktown's crew and search for survivors. On the sea surface, vast oil slicks marked the destruction. At an American fleet communication room, Admiral Nimitz, who monitored the battle from afar, received a full report on the performance of the Japanese torpedoes. He said nothing.
His silence was heavier than any explosion. He understood that Pearl Harbor was a tactical failure, but the failure to respect the enemy's technology was a failure of mindset. Immediately, an order was issued. The top priority was to upgrade the Mark 13 torpedo, especially the detonator and speed, learning from the very enemy they had just faced. A few weeks later, in Japan, Engineer Koji received the Midway report, but it was a report of disaster, not victory. Although the Type 91 torpedoes proved their deadly effectiveness on the Yorktown, tactical inexperience and errors in rearming the aircraft led to the loss of Japan's carrier fleet. Koji felt no joy about his design's success. He felt a deep emptiness. His torpedo worked, but the IJN's pride had been destroyed. He looked at the model of the Type 91, no longer seeing a toy but a razor-sharp blade, refined to perfection yet used at the wrong time in the wrong way. He knew his secret had been revealed.
Late 1942. The war in the Pacific had entered a new, more brutal phase. The U.S. Navy was no longer laughing. Instead, they worked frantically to correct their flaws, accepting the harsh truth that they had been technologically outpaced in torpedo warfare. The expensive lessons from Midway were etched deep into the USN's psyche. Never underestimate the enemy based on superficial prejudice. The scar of that arrogance became the driving force behind innovation. For the American sailors and pilots who survived Midway, every time they saw a deep tear in a ship's hull, they remembered the wooden fins they once mocked. It was not a victory of wood over steel, but a victory of technical refinement.